A continuación, en Poder 97.1, tu hora informativa. Entrevistas e información para nuestra comunidad. Y ahora con ustedes, Ida Pérez.
Buenos días, mi gente de Rochester, y bienvenido a su hora informativa. Mi nombre es Ida Pérez y para mí es un verdadero placer poder estar con ustedes en esta mañana. Su hora informativa es un programa que les trae información importante que esperamos que los inspire a una mejor calidad de vida para usted y su familia. Cubrimos información sobre los campos de salud, educación, empleo, vivienda y muchos otros temas más que nos afectan como persona y como pueblo. Su hora informativa está aquí todos los sábados de 10 a 11 de la mañana y nos alegramos muchísimo de que estén con nosotros aquí en el día de hoy. Today I have a full house. It's nice to have a full house, right? And I'm going to ask all of my guests to introduce themselves, to tell us your name, where you're originally from, and how long have you been here in Rochester? And I don't know who wants to start.
Oh, they're all looking at me, so I guess I'm going first. Hi.
Okay.
I'm Jared Case, curator of film exhibitions at the George Eastman Museum, and my family's been in this area forever, as far as I know. We moved around a lot. We lived in Dansville, Palmyra, out west in Albion. Mi madre fue una profesora del español.
Mira qué bien.
At Wilson and a couple of different other schools. Nice. So recuerdo algo, pero no mucho.
Yeah, no.
And mostly in the present tense.
I
can understand.
Exactly.
I was looking at you, I was getting about every third word. So.
Now, where's your family originally from? Like, where did they come from?
They met in Holly, New York. They got married and moved directly to Rochester for an apartment. And we've been around the area, wherever my mom was teaching. So.
And where's your mother's parents originally from? Like, that's where I want to get to, like, where they came.
So my mother's parents were German.
Okay.
The maiden name was Black. So there were a lot of German and Italian immigrants in the area. People working at Kodak, of course.
Yes. Oh, okay, cool, awesome.
Yeah,
awesome. How about you?
My name is Jamie Allen. I'm the Stephen B. and Janice G. Ashley curator and head of the Department of Photography at the Eastman Museum. And I've lived here for about 20 years. I'm going to go cumulatively here because I've moved here 3 times from the Phoenix, Arizona area.
Okay.
I grew up in Phoenix. Okay. I went to school in Tucson, but my family had moved there for work. So my parents both grew up in Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. And where did their families come from?
It's a mixture of, we came over on the Mayflower. And we came over during the 1900s immigration period from Norway, Germany, so Wales, England, Norway. Norway and Germany. Yeah. I tried to put Norway and Germany as one thing there.
Cool. And how about you?
Hi there. I'm Eliza Bennington. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Engagement at the museum. I've lived in Rochester for 37 years from the Washington, D.C. area. That's where I grew up. And both my parents' families are both from England.
Okay, yeah. I always like to ask that question because people think that we're so different, right? In reality, we're not. And a lot of times, our families came here for the same reasons, for a better life, for looking, to just have a better life for themselves and their families. And, and even if it was many, many, many generations ago, coming from with the Mayflower, it's still pretty much the same, right? People always come here to look for a better life. And my brother, my sister-in-law, and my other brother all worked for Kodak. My brother Louis, he did the international exchange or whatever it was. He had a really big title, and he was also a pastor at a church, and one day on a plane, God told him, you really need to work more with the youth. And he left his job at Kodak, which everybody in my family thought was crazy. Like, what are you doing? Like, my dad had a fit, but that was his calling, and he never regretted it. He just retired recently in December of this past year, but he worked there for a lot of years. So did both of my sister-in-law. And then I think my brother then moved to Xerox, but he did work for Kodak as well. And Kodak was like a big thing in our house, I looked through my dad things, and I still have like little magnifying glasses that says Kodak on it. Just all these little chink tricks that my brother would give him.
Old issues of the Kodakery that
Yeah.
they get in the mail every month.
Yes.
Yeah.
He would have I think he had a pen that said Kodak on it. There was a lot of things that my dad saved that had Kodak on it. So it's really interesting.
I think they made a lot of swag.
Yeah, they did. They did.
Beach balls
They
and
did.
towels
Yes,
and-
yes. But my dad had cool stuff. Like he had like had a couple of magnifying glasses that were pretty cool. Had a couple of, I think he had like a little pocket knife or something. I don't know. Just really cool stuff that had Kodak on it. And my father actually took photography as an adult at MCC. And, our house became a dark room. He had an area where he would develop all his pictures and things. And that was really fun. That was really fun to see how my dad got really into photography.
I've been there and done that.
Yeah. And back then, that's all you used, right? Now there's lots of options. But back then, everybody used Kodak. And we all had a little Kodak, camera. And it was pretty cool. So Kodak was a big part
It's
of
interesting because that
our
Kodak
life.
brand is popular again too. That there's a
Yeah.
lot of, so it's licensed to other companies,
Yeah.
but to have shirts and
Yeah.
sweatshirts and other swag
Yeah.
that says Kodak on it. So it's pretty cool when you got vintage stuff. and
Yeah,
they get the
yeah,
original
yeah.
stuff.
I still have my dad's stuff. I have it put away in a drawer, and I won't give it to anybody because I thought it was really cool to just have. So thank you. And today we're going to be talking about George Eastman House, right? And I know you guys mentioned I kind of got your title, like I know what you do, but I want to know what you guys do. Like what exactly is your title? What exactly is it that you do?
So the title is Curator of Film Exhibitions.
Yeah.
We're a museum of photography and film. And we have exhibition spaces for the photography exhibitions that go up, and we have an exhibition space for the film. Most people call it a movie theater, but it's called the Dryden Theater, and it's been open since 1951. And 5 nights a week, we are there showing films from the history of film. So we've got a silent film tonight. We've got a film from the 60s tomorrow, and we've got Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman in Casablanca. But by the time this airs, that'll be that night on Saturday. So we're trying to educate the audience that this is a piece of art, much like the photography is, much like paintings are, and that these pieces of art are individual pieces. So even though you can watch Casablanca on your phone or on DVD or on Blu-ray, this 35 millimeter print has its own life. I mean, it may be that this is Martin Scorsese's personal 35 millimeter print. We've got Scorsese's collection at the museum, or it's a 35 millimeter print that was made early in the 50s. So these individual pieces of art deserve to be exhibited in much the same way, and they deserve to be experienced in the same way with people on a big screen as you're immersed in this this atmosphere of cinematic discovery.
Cool. And your position.
So
Tell us again.
I have a long title. I have an endowed title, so somebody has given money to help support my position. So the Stephen B. and Janice G. Ashley. So I'm the curator and head of the Department of Photography. So what that means is, like Jared, I'm a curator, so I get to do things like select what's going to be on display, interpret those things for our audience, write about them in publications, but also in my role as a curator, I'm also thinking about what's coming into our collection and what's in our collection that maybe doesn't need to be there, and also how we frame our entirety of our collection. The Department of Photography is it's about 500,000 objects as best we can tell. We're still working on inventorying it, but it's a really expansive collection that talks about the entire history of photography. So from 1839, when that medium was invented and then introduced to the world, to today, but also pre that, thinking about what were the things that were happening in painting and drawing and other media prior to that. So both interpreting it and then creating access to it for everyone as well. So cataloging our collection, digitizing our collection, you can go online and look. And like Jared was talking about, the kind of the objectness of a film, we really believe that the things that we hold in our collection are the things themselves, the things that people really should get to experience. So trying to put those things on display, trying to create access to them. So we have everything from the things that people expect, like Ansel Adams and Graciela Iturbide's work, to things that people might not expect, like photographic jewelry, a lamp that's got pictures of deer on it with deer legs. So it's really expansive in the terms of how photography has been used as science, as photojournalism, as art, as well as all the different ways it's been produced.
Wow. So the museum's been around, what, like 75 years,
Yeah.
right? So tell us about that. How did that started, and how is it different from, when it started to what it is today? Because obviously, generations change. Everything is digital now. So, how do you cater to the different generations?
Yeah, so currently our museum was opened in 1949 to the public. That's when we started displaying objects. It was founded in 1947, but the foundation of the institution is really a photography, film, and related technologies. So cameras and darkroom equipment and all kinds of cool stuff like that. So really when we were founded, it was really an emphasis on those histories. But in 1989, we were able to add an additional building that allowed us to better preserve and hold our collections in better facilities. And at that point in time, we were able to go back and start to interpret the history of George Eastman himself, the founder of Kodak, as well as restore his home and gardens.
Nice. Anything else you want to
Yeah, so once we were able to move all of the collection items out of the mansion, because the mansion itself was the museum up until 1989. So you'd walk in and you'd go upstairs to one of the bedrooms, and that's where you'd see an exhibit. You'd be down in one of the public, like George Eastman's living room or billiard room, and that's where you'd attend a talk, or the cameras were on display in the conservatory, which many people remember as the room where there's the large elephant head and the organ. And so that's really how you visited the museum. But once we were able to move all of those collections, we were then able to properly restore and furnish, and we were able to recover 85% of the original furnishings. And so that then became sort of these two museums in one, so that you have the building from 1989 where you have the galleries, you have the mansion where you experience George Eastman, but then also the Dryden Theater where more often in evenings is where you experience films. But a couple other things in 2020, actually during COVID, we did a major restoration or a major construction project where we added our new visitor center. And so that created this entrance that was much more welcoming, much more accessible, that became sort of the center of where you'd walk in before you go into either the Dryden or the mansion or the gallery space. And with that, we also restored a space that had been the stables during George Eastman's time. And so that now is a space where you can see moving image art. So we do have some more and more moving image experiences that we're trying to provide during the day, too, in addition to what you can see in the evening at the Dryden.
Yeah. I've never been to either.
Well, come.
We will get you there then. We would be...
I've never been to either, and it's funny because my friend and I, we try to do something at least once a month together. And a couple of times I've gone, to the website and say, okay, maybe we could do this, and then she'll say, no, let's do something else, and then we end up... So I think maybe 3 times already I've gone and said, I really want to go to this place. I really want to check it out. And then we end up changing to something else. So I really got to make this our date. So
I was going to say, so hopefully after this conversation, you'll have all sorts of things you can share with your friend to say, these are all the reasons we should go.
Yes. So I really need to make that a priority for us to be able to go, because it's one of those things that you live here all your life. I just shared with you how important Kodak was for us, growing up, and, a lot of my family working there and whatnot. And I know so many people that worked for Kodak, right? But I've never gone. Like, why is that?
I think it's because I find that in other cities, too. So growing up in Washington, D.C., it wasn't until a friend of mine came to visit during college that I went to the top of the Washington Monument. Because it was always there. And I think that's the same thing in New York City. People don't necessarily get to the Statue of Liberty or the Empire State Building. It's there.
Okay.
So I find that we hear that a lot from other people in Rochester, too, that it takes having people come in from out of town who may even be the ones that say, hey, I want to go to this place.
Yeah.
Or thinking, oh, gosh, what should we do with our friends that came into town or our family that came into town?
Yeah.
Something like that prompts them to come. But we hope that we'll provide other ideas for you to
absolutely.
see why to come.
Absolutely.
But I also wonder if people think there's a barrier there about like that the museums aren't accessible to them, or if they don't already know about the history of photography or technology or something,
Right,
that they're
right.
not going to get anything out of it.
Yeah.
But I think institutions really work to help anyone feel
Yeah.
comfortable at their institution.
And I can see that in the Latino community
Yeah.
where we're kind of like, okay, that's not for us, that's for other people.
Right.
You know, there's nothing there that is going to connect to us, which would be interesting to know. You know, is there any connections with either people that have worked at Kodak? I want to say that, and I don't know if you guys know this, but Julio Sanz wrote a book a couple years ago, well, several years ago, and one of the early pictures that he has in his book, which is called I think it's called The History of Latinos in Rochester. And one of the very first pages, there's a gentleman that worked, he was one of the first Latinos to work for Kodak back in, I don't know what year it was, but it was many, many, many years ago. So I'm wondering, is there any connections like that you guys can maybe talk about?
So I
I
think
don't mean to put anybody on the spot.
No. So I think there's a real kind of connection to Kodak in the city that we don't necessarily always represent that full picture. We are really the history of photography and film, as well as the legacy of George Eastman. And so really when we look at the history of Kodak, we're really only looking up to when he dies in 1932, right? So it's it's the foundations of photography and making photography accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
And so what I think about is, everybody has seen a movie in a movie theater. Everybody takes a photograph with their phone all the time, right? We're all photographers. We all
Right,
know about moving images. So this is a space where we can explore that history. And I think there's always something for everyone. Even if there's only one thing in that institution that you want to stand and look at for an hour, that's fine, right? Because there's all kinds of things. Like right now, on display in our Life with Photographs exhibition is one of the first photographs made in Mexico. How'd that end up here? Why is that here? And why was that photograph made? Really interesting history, and it's right there on display for everyone.
Cool. Yeah, I always, like I said, try to schedule something and then something else comes up and I don't. So it's time for me to be able to do that. So tell us a little bit about these films that I didn't even know you guys had films like 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Hey, you could go to, like, there's an alternative to the actual theater that you can go to.
Yeah. So basically, since we opened, we've been collecting film right alongside photography, so motion picture film. And currently, we advertise. I don't think we have an exact count, but we tell people we have 28,000 different titles in the collection at the museum. And now this ranges from a small reel of home movies that has its own individual title to The Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind, which we have multiple elements for, including the original negatives that they were shot on nitrate film. So it's putting together a series of films throughout the year. We've got maybe 250 slots. So trying to represent the entire history of film across those 250 slots, because there's thousands of films that come out every year around the world. So it's about selecting films that represent specific series where we can sort of contextualize these films and talk about them in a different way. So right now we've got a Henry Fonda series going on, which looks at American history through the films of Henry Fonda. We've also got a series called From Rochester with Love that highlights people who were born in or lived in or studied in or worked in Rochester. So that's actually where Casablanca comes in, because Ingrid Bergman lived here for 2 years in the 1940s. And Humphrey Bogart, his family summered on Seneca Point when he was a boy. So we're taking those points of information and building series around them that hopefully provide a little context, a little bit of education for the audience as well. But it's from 1895. It's the 130th anniversary of the first film projection this year. So we've got a lot to choose from, and that material that those first films were shown on was nitrate film. And, of course, Kodak made nitrate film up until the 1950s. But that nitrate film was very much, it was the clearest plastic that they could find. But it was very close in composition, chemical composition, to gun cotton. So it was very flammable. And there were many instances of tragedies that happened when the film caught on fire. So they switched to a safer plastic called acetate in 1951. But all of these nitrate films made up until then were no longer shown at most places. But since we opened in 1951 as a theater, our projectors have been able to project nitrate film since that point in time, and we've maintained that ability. And we have thousands of reels of nitrate film in our collection, and there's nitrate film at archives around the world because it was the first 50 years of cinematic history, and a lot of that has been duplicated onto safer stock. But we, 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, Deborah Stoiber, who works at the museum, and I had offices next to each other, and she would work a lot with the nitrate film, and she had a list of films that were still projectable, even though they were on nitrate stock. And I'm a big film noir fan, and I've seen nitrate projected, and I know that black and white has that really stark contrast, and it would look great. So I was like, we should do a weekend of nitrate film noir. And Deb was like, actually, we've got a lot more than that. We can do more than that. So we took this idea to our boss at the time, the curator of the department, and he said, if you want to do it, go ahead and do it. So that first nitrate picture show, which is now still going, we did in 6 months, just with films that we knew about. But it's a weekend dedicated to projection of this rare material that only the George Eastman Museum, the Dryden Theater, can do on the East Coast. There's some out in California, but those, you have to drive for hours or fly for hours to get there. So just to have this in our backyard, the ability to show this rare nitrate film attracts people from around the world who want to see, who want to experience this. And the films that we show are, short films, documentaries, dramas, comedies, musicals, because everything was made on nitrate film back then. So it's something really special and something that we highlight every year.
Yeah, cool. That's really cool. What else can you tell us about, the theater and things that your guys are doing differently, and really your purpose of being here today?
Well, I would say a big part of being here is because of the 75th anniversary, where it's exciting for us to sort of look at all aspects of what we do, whether it's through the photography exhibitions that we have or film, but also how we can strengthen our ties with the community and what we can do in sort of back to Jamie's point even of barriers, and if people feel as though, oh, it's not for me, or maybe like one of the things that we have is if language is a barrier, we know there's so many languages spoken here in Rochester, and we have something that we've had now for a couple years, which is a free digital guide that people can just scan a QR code or just go to the website when they come to visit the museum, and it will translate all of the material that's on it. So we have a mobile tour that people can take as they walk through the mansion, or a lot of audio that you can listen to in the galleries, and it's translated into more than 30 languages. So somebody can come and be able to access that way. We also try to make sure that we can be as accessible as possible to somebody who, if it's a challenge for them financially to come and visit. For a number of years now, we were the first of the museums in Rochester to extend free admission for SNAP and EBT card holders, as well as active military and their families. So we really want to remove any of those barriers that people might have. And then also, it's now 3 years this month that we launched a new gallery space called Gallery Obscura. It's our community gallery, and it's an opportunity for us. It's mostly been highlighting the work of teens and youth in the community. We have an exhibit that's opening up this weekend, and it's the third time we've worked with Flower City Art Center's Studio 678 Photo Club, which is an after-school program of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who are actually learning to photograph using film. They learn in the darkroom how to process. They learn how to mat and frame their works. And so it's really been exciting. They also write some poems along with their work. So it's a great way to engage these students, and it opens this weekend with some poetry readings by the students. So that space is just one of many things that we're doing to try to connect with the community.
If I can add, I also think that people sometimes think museums are for adults, and we are really friendly to families, to anyone who wants to come, and that I think is an important thing. History and culture are for everyone in our society, and having that introduction as a child to just being in that space makes you feel comfortable and welcome when you're an adult. So we have things like rack cards, where it talks about how to do I Spy in the galleries, so that there's those simple ways to interact. If you're not comfortable, there's ways that will help you feel comfortable, or ways that we can help you engage with the art. For older kids, we have things that are more about empathy or thinking about the perspective taking that a photographer has. Even something like a viewfinder, so that you have that experience of looking through a camera that nobody really has to do anymore, right?
Yes.
And then we also have the discovery room, which is a really fun space where everybody says it's for families, but I like to go there as an adult. And you can
It'll probably be something I like too.
yeah, you can interact with stuff. You can pick up the cameras in that room. You can make your own little like film kind of animations. It's really fun, and there's books and there's activities so that people can engage with optics and different ideas around photography and film in different ways.
And that was one of the things that I was going to ask, is there any kind of programming for youth, that may not know and want to learn about photography? When I was in second grade and I went to school 14 on university, we had a teacher, Mr. Sovio. I don't know if he's still alive or not, but he gave us actual cameras, and he created this little room that he had in off the classroom, and he made it into a dark room, and he had us take pictures, and that was I felt like I learned a lot. And we were in second grade, you're not thinking about taking pictures and developing them, but he really instilled that in us. And it was interesting because what I learned from that was more of, what are you really looking at? You're taking a picture, but what are you really looking at? And he would always point out, once we took the pictures, he would point out these things in our pictures that would say, did you notice this? Did you notice that? And it really gave you a different lens to look at things. I thought that was really cool to be able to learn that, at a very young age. But, in involving youth in some way, I think and my niece participated in something at her job where they took pictures of kind of where they grew up and whatnot. And it was really, really interesting because one of her pictures, it blended like a picture of one
a double
and
exposure.
The other, like a double exposure. And it was really cool because it really showed her sitting in front of my parents' house, but then it also had part of Clinton Avenue, and it had part of a mural that had been painted. And it kind of all told her story. It was really cool how that happened. And she said it wasn't. It was an accident.
I was going to say, that's what you get when you're doing film. Yeah.
That was a really cool accident to happen, right? And I didn't even know accidents like that can happen in film. So again, really interesting things that can be done, that brings the interest of young people into photography. We do have a niece she has her own photography company, so pictures means a lot to us.
We encounter them thousands of times every day, right?
Yep.
And we don't necessarily think about it. And what you were describing that your teacher was doing, we have an exercise, we call it reading a photograph. And so we're just starting to introduce more activities around that. But one of them in the Discovery Room, as Jamie mentioned, we highlight a photo that's in one of our current exhibitions, and we invite our visitors, young and old, to read the photo. What are some questions that you might consider as you're looking at a photo? And it just draws you in to be a little bit more focused on some of those aspects of the photograph that you might not have seen before. And a lot of what we do with youth, certainly with school groups, in addition to working then with some of these organizations to bring in the work of youth, we also partner with Writers and Books, and we've been working both with School 19 and School 23 to bring in students and have this idea of image meets word. So reading the image, but also developing poems and sort of, and then presenting your work, so it sort of touches on all aspects of literacy. And then libraries, that's another way that we hope to invite families to come into the museum if they may not have thought of that there's something for their kids, is we also do a lot of outreach where we go into the libraries and do some activities in an effort to connect with the community and invite them in.
I don't know if you guys are familiar at all with Bad Bunny. He's a reggaeton rapper type of, and his latest album is I Should Have Taken More Photos. Debí tomar más fotos. And it just stirred our entire community. It was so cool, at the beginning of the year, because he launched it at the beginning of the year, to see including myself, just looking for photos, old photos, and wanting to, put them on Facebook and have other people look at them. And then also thinking about, some people that I've lost in my life that I'm like, man, I should have taken more photos with them, because now I don't have that memory. And then, one of his songs talks about, not having those photos, not that having those photos really help with the memory, right?
Yes.
Like you have a photo, you might forget about something, but then you look at that photo and you're like, whoa, I remember that. I remember that day. I remember what happened. So it's been really cool, and it's kind of made this movement within our community of people wanting to share photos or take photos, or just the whole topic of taking photographs and the importance of it and how it helps us remember things.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the amazing things about photography, right? Is that you can hold and capture.
Yeah.
And I hate to use the word capture, but I haven't come up with a better one, so please let me have a better one. But to really take that moment in time and freeze it, and all those memories surrounding that event, like a film strip, right, kind of can come back in your head, but from that one frozen moment in time. And you can say, no, this is when I got my pink bike when I was 5 and it was my birthday. This is when my grandparents came to visit and I touched that cactus, right? I can remember those things because of the photographs we have in our family, but also I can see the generations of people that came before me. And that's what I think is so great when you come into our galleries, is you can see all these different perspectives, all these different things that other people saw in the world. And you can take them in for yourself and bring your own knowledge to them and bring your own visions to them, and then take that back and think, how can I do something like that? So it's inspiration for you to go out and make more memories.
Yes, definitely.
And I would just add, those are actually some programs that are in development right now. We're talking about how can we help people better understand how to preserve the importance of preserving their family photographs, how to preserve their family photographs.
Yes, because we stick them in an album, and sometimes they end up in a basement in a box.
And they might get wet, they get too hot, they stick together. Exactly.
Yep.
So we see an
those-
important role there that we can where we can help.
The digital photographs on your phone are probably even more at risk than anything you have printed out. So print your photographs, people.
Yes. No, we do. And it's funny because I have a sister that, as a matter of fact, she just sent me with this whole thing of people looking at photos and whatnot. She was looking through some photos, and she sent me some photos of me and my ex-husband dancing. And she sent one for me and one for each of my daughters. So she prints all the time. She's constantly printing pictures. I think she's probably the one that prints the most. But there's certain pictures that I do print because I like them so much that I don't want to lose, if I lose my phone or whatever, if they're not in the cloud or wherever they go, then I'm not going to have them. So I do like to print photos, but you're right. We should print them more and share them more too.
And we hear those stories of people who are like, if I were ever to have a fire in my home, this is what I'm running to, is this family album that we have. Album. It's not all the other things. It's that photograph album, and that's how important photographs are in our lives.
And especially for us, like we don't have a lot of photos. Like we have a really good photo of both of my grandparents on both of my parents' side, right? But we don't have anything beyond them. Like we don't have any photos of them and their siblings and their family. And so like those two photos, like everybody in the family has a copy of it because it's the only two photos that we have, of my grandparents. But now, you could take so many photos and have, many, many generations to come. But we don't have that. We have a few old photos, but not real good ones, or they're really faded and things like that. But we don't have like lots of nice family photos from generations before my grandparents, which is not that far away, right?
And that's so uncommon.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad, right? Because we don't have those memories because people didn't have cameras back then, or if they did, usually the pictures were taken somewhere. Like they would go somewhere and pay somebody, and they had like a little stand and
little photo studio.
They would lean their little shoulder on something while they were taking their photo. Like they all kind of look the same the way they were posed, but there's so few of them. Like we don't have a lot of them at all. Oh my God! There was a question that I wanted to ask and it slipped my mind for. Oh, I know what it was. So a person like me has never been to the George Eastman house. So I know I understand that the house is separate from the museum. So there's two separate buildings. So talk to us about going into George Eastman House. Like, what can we expect? Like, what does that feel like?
So, and it's all connected. So hopefully when you go in, it feels seamless to you.
Okay.
But when you enter, as I said, we have this new visitor center now. And so the wonderful thing there is we have that opportunity with the moving image art is in that space. Our museum shop is in that space. Typically when people are coming in and I'm greeting them, I say, you have the opportunity to visit the museum in two different ways. Either you can start by going into the mansion. We do have public tours of the mansion 2 times a day, so you could do a guided tour, or you could, using that digital guide that I mentioned, you could walk through and do the audio tour through that way, or you can start by going down into the exhibitions and visit the various exhibitions, and then flip and then do the other. If you have children in tow, or even just have the curiosity, as Jamie mentioned, you can play around in the discovery room up on the second floor of the mansion and have fun with that. One thing that you might hear as you're walking through the mansion is a little bit of construction, because one of the exciting things we're doing right now is taking some unrestored rooms of the mansion and we're turning them into gallery spaces, so that in early 2027 is the hope, we will have an exhibition where you'll walk in first and learn about George Eastman. Because right now, unless you take a docent guided tour or listen to the mobile tour, you're not getting that context about who George Eastman was. And in fact, you're getting a very limited context of who George Eastman was. And what we are doing, we have a new curator in the role who is really starting from the earliest letters George Eastman wrote when he was 10 years old to his uncle, and just reading, using
That's
primary resources, what did George Eastman say? What was he thinking? What was he doing? And then really being transparent too, as so many institutions are, so many organizations that celebrate an individual, we're looking at all aspects of the individual and presenting the facts and not saying this is how you should feel about George Eastman, but these are the things that George Eastman did. Some things contradict other things that he did. So while he was a great man, he was also a man, just a man. And so what are some of the things that he did? So we're really excited. This is going to be one of the most transformational things we've done to the museum, is to have that experience, to walk through there first, and then you'll have a whole different perspective of who George Eastman was as you then start to visit his home. And then if you get hungry, we have Open Face, which is actually, some people in Rochester know of it as a very popular eatery that was in the South Wedge that closed for a bit. And then when we opened our visitor center, we brought Open Face in. So it's an opportunity to get a bite to eat. The weather is turning, so you can go and enjoy the gardens. We have beautiful gardens on the property.
I've heard about the gardens.
Yeah, and they've been restored to look as it did when George Eastman lived there. Another big project that we're doing now is the structures in the garden. So some of those landscape structures weren't restored at the time that the mansion was. So that's what we're doing now, and also making them much more accessible. So our largest garden, our terrace garden, had a step down into it. It had bricks that were a little uneven. So we've repointed the bricks. We've changed it so that now anybody can walk through or go through with a stroller or a walker or a wheelchair and not have to encounter steps. And then one of the really fun things that comes up in the summer with the gardens is our Garden Vibes concert series. So we do 3 concerts out in the gardens where we have food trucks, and I think just today's beautiful weather is getting me thinking about that.
Yeah, I know, right?
So, yeah.
Yeah, things to look forward to as the weather gets better.
And then if you have a later bite to eat, because then at 7:30 we have our film. So then you'll want to check out what's going to be playing at the Dryden, and whether you stay that evening and go to the Dryden or you decide to come back, you've got to take in the Dryden. Or if it's a Saturday, there's a 2:00 matinee. So you could plan a Saturday visit where you plan it around, you spend some time first, get a bite to eat, go to the matinee, and you've had a full day. And I'm sure Jared or Jamie can add other experiences. But
Well, I was just thinking about how at least every 6 months there's something new, right? In terms of the photography galleries and the technology galleries, and the moving image department often shows things there too. So there's always something new to experience. So just because you went once doesn't mean you shouldn't come back,
come back,
There's new film on display, there's new gallery, new photographs on display. You'll find something fun to see.
Yeah.
Oh, and another thing to experience too on a Sunday is music. George Eastman loved music. He would have musicians come in and perform. We do have his original Aeolian pipe organ in the mansion. I say it's when the mansion truly comes alive. I mean, you literally hear the pipes breathing. And so the first Sunday of every month we have it played by our resident organist or one of our other organists. But you never know. Sometimes you walk through and they are there practicing and you hear it as well. But we have a number of musicians from the community that will come on Sunday afternoon and play. So we continue that tradition of music in the home as well.
Where can we find a listing of the movies? Like, how do we find that?
So many places.
So we know what to go look for.
The best place is probably to go to the webpage, eastman.org/Dryden. And we've got calendars for March and April up right now.
Okay.
And we've got listings that have write-ups of each of the films, plus the series that they belong to. And we also have accounts on Facebook and Instagram and Blue Sky, and you can follow us there. Okay. And that sometimes has updated information as things change rapidly. Not often in our place, but we tend to plan them out several months in advance. But if there is something that changes, those are the best places to get information on that.
Cool. Again, any films in Spanish? Do you have any films in Spanish that
doing
might
a
be
deep
interesting
dive
to our community?
Doing a deep dive into that right now, and we're actually looking at September and October, and highlighting some of these films coming out. So one of the ones that I'm really excited about showing is a print of The Others, directed by Alejandro Amenabar, which is perfect for the sort of Halloween season. But we've got films by Glauber Roca and some others. So Luis Buñuel did some. He decided to not be a Spanish citizen and wanted to become a Mexican citizen. So he made 5 or 6 films in Mexico that we have prints of as well. So it's, I mean, we're sort of constricted. We don't always show films only from our own collection, so we can bring them from outside. But in order to make the economics of it work, about half of the films have to come from our collection. So we're constrained by what we have, what people have collected in the decades prior to us. But there is some stuff that we're going to try to bring out and highlight.
Yeah. Because I know a lot of people in our Latino community that actually work for Kodak. I mean, that was their lifeline, when they were raising up a family and things like that. So it would be interesting to see if there's something that attracts, right, the Latino community into George Eastman, and take advantage of some of these great things that you guys are offering, right?
But there's a long history of Latinos in Hollywood as well. So whether it's a musical with Dolores Del Rio or Ricardo Montalban playing the romantic lead in something, there's probably always something to seek out and to grab onto.
Yeah. Is there space to rent? Like if somebody wanted to do something in these properties, is there space that people can rent to do that? And what would that be? Like what kind of events do you hold?
Yeah, everything from organizations, nonprofits, and corporations do things. Some families have done some events, celebrations of anniversaries and that sort of thing. We have all sorts of different locations of different sizes within the museum. So weddings, we do have a limited number of weddings that we are able to schedule indoors, but also the gardens are a beautiful location for weddings. Wedding photography is something that's very popular as well, to have wedding photographs. So, on our website, we have a link to our facility rentals, and it has information about the various different spaces. And then our colleague, Alan Buell, is the Senior Director of Special Events. So he's the one that would field those calls, field those queries, and have a conversation about what is it that someone would like to do and how could we accommodate it. I love that you brought that up, because in many cases that's the first time someone comes to visit is because their organization is having a holiday party,
or so they were invited
exactly,
by
or there's an award ceremony for something, or there's some big family event, and so it's an opportunity for someone to come that hasn't had a chance to
before. Because I go
before.
to a lot of those, but it hasn't been at George Eastman. So that's why I asked, do you guys do anything there? I want to talk a little bit about this movie that I watched with Ed Harris, and I can't remember the title of it. But
they're all looking at me now.
Yeah, it had to do with him finding a specific type of film, and it was a Kodak film. I love Ed Harris, so anything with him in it, I'll watch. Yeah. And I watched it, and I guess he was, obviously older, getting sick. I think he had some kind of illness. and there was a film that he needed to develop or something like that.
Was it Kodachrome?
I think yes.
Probably Kodachrome.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kodachrome is an interesting product because they basically aren't processing it anymore. There was one place in Kansas, I believe, that could process Kodachrome film, and then they had to shut down. So it's a very hard thing. I think they might have reinstated a little bit, but it's such a beautiful process because the colors are kind of so pure in that process and so stable. So people really admired and have, loved their Kodachrome, and like Paul Simon's song about Kodachrome, right? It's like something people really loved.
Yeah, I remember that movie, and I was like, oh, and I remember at the end, because I'm the one that reads the edits and stuff, and who was in it and who did what. And interesting enough, I always look for Spanish names.
Sure.
Was anybody in there Latino, type of thing. And they had Kodak on there because it was a Kodak, film that he was looking to develop.
Yeah.
It was a nice movie.
As you talk about it more, I remember it a bit. It was a small movie that was made about him being the last one to have like Kodachrome or making that trip. Yeah, he was driving there, right?
Yeah, he had his daughter or I don't know if it was his daughter or his son and their wives or husband, whoever it was, taking him. And at first they were like, oh man, we got to do this trip. And he knew exactly where to go it was the only place where they would do it. And I don't remember where the place was, but they had to drive him literally across country to go get this film done.
Yeah.
And then when he developed it, and I don't even remember, I'm going to have to go back and look for it and watch it again because it was really cool. And he, and it was just interesting that it was like, wow, they don't do that anymore. And here, if you had that, and he really needed to get that developed. Like there were some memories there that he really wanted, and he was dying, and he wanted to do that before he died.
Yeah.
So it was really, really cool. So if people want to get to know you guys, if they want to contact you, if they want more information, they have questions, where do they go?
So our website, eastman.org, is the best place to start. We do have an email that's info@eastman.org. So if somebody has a specific question, not needing to try to remember our names and emails,
right.
starting at info@eastman.org is a great place to start, and they can send along their question, and we'd love to have a conversation and answer any questions too.
Now, I didn't ask about George Eastman himself. Like, where did he come from? When did he come? How did he end up here in Rochester? If anybody can share that.
So he was born in Waterville, New York, which is near Utica. It's about 2 hours
not
away.
So far.
And his dad saw that Rochester was an opportunity for growth and started a business school here in Rochester. So he moved ahead of the family to Rochester and then moved the whole family here. The business school that he started is actually still, I think it was Bryant and Stratton, I don't know what it's called now, but it's still in business. Nice. Sadly, soon after the family moved here, George Eastman's father passed away. So he was raised by his mom. He had a couple sisters. His mom, they lived in a home where they started to take in some boarders. And so the interesting story about George Eastman and kind of the short form story of how George Eastman became what he became, he was working a number of different odd jobs at an accounting firm, at a bank, had saved some money. And at that time, real estate was a good investment. And there was actually some real estate in the Dominican Republic. And he was going to go and visit, and someone said, you should take a camera with you so you can photograph this land that you're considering purchasing. So he bought a camera, took some lessons, figured out how to use it. At the time, though, it was a very cumbersome activity, what was called the wet plate process, where you had to basically have your darkroom with you out in the field wherever you were taking pictures. So what it prompted was for him to realize, okay, wait a second, there's an opportunity here. He decided, he canceled his trip. And at the time, the first thing he did was start the Eastman Dry Plate Company. So it made it so that you still were taking photos on glass plates, but you didn't have to have all your darkroom and all your chemicals and everything with you. And soon after that, it was the roll film that made it even easier. Wow. And then, of course, the most amazing marketing slogan, which was "You press the button, we do the rest." And for people to understand that they would take their photos, and then no matter where they lived, they would mail their camera here to Rochester, New York, and you probably know this story from the Kodak Heritage, but it would be processed and reloaded, and your photos would be put in a little envelope and sent back to you. Yes. So it was really ingenious.
awesome. Did he ever marry? Did he have children?
He never
No.
married. There is some correspondence of a romantic nature with some women. We don't fully know. We suspect that potentially he was so focused on growing his company,
Wow.
and he was quite a bit older at a time when he decided to embrace leisure. So he never did marry, never had children. His daughter, Ellen, had a niece named Ellen, who married a man named George Dryden, who gave us the funds to open the Dryden Theater. There were a lot of Ellen and Georges in the family. So they were like his niece and her children were
Yeah.
his family. And so there is some extended family from the Drydens
Right.
that is still connected to the museum.
And his sisters, I'm assuming they did marry and have
One of his
children.
sisters passed away when she was younger. So it was
wow.
Ellen was the only sister. So
Wow.
we'll hear from people with the name Eastman that'll say they're a descendant. And it's none of the descendants come from Eastman. It's all,
Yeah.
unless it's distant on the side
Right,
of his
right,
father or
right,
something.
right,
It's the
right.
Dryden family.
That's too bad.
Yeah.
Right? Why the word Kodak?
So when he, again, genius marketer, he decided that he was already thinking global, and he wanted to make sure that he came up with a word that was easy to say, that didn't mean something else in another language so that it couldn't be misinterpreted. He used to do a lot of word games. He would have loved Wordle, but he did Scrabble and anagrams and a lot of word games. His mother's last name was Kilborn, her maiden name, and he thought that was a really strong letter, the letter K. So he started by taking, K at the beginning, K at the end, kind of played around and came up with Kodak. And so that was the name. And up until not long ago, Kodak and Coca-Cola were sort of battling back and forth as 1 and 2 as far as a brand. So, the K sound, if anybody's starting a company, K is apparently a good way to start.
Yeah. I always thought about that. Like, why Kodak and why the two Ks, at the beginning and at the end, and where did that come from? And you're absolutely right. You don't want it to be mixed up with anything. I remember, I don't know who makes the Nova car, but and Latinos did not buy those cars because Nova means don't go.
Yeah.
Doesn't go. So people were like, oh no, I don't want to buy a car that doesn't go.
Yeah.
I need a car that's going to take me places. So it's interesting how words will really kind of mess you up, and you're like, no, I don't want a part of that because I don't like the way that sounds.
He was also very humble and very proud. I know when I first moved here, I assumed there was a Mr. Eastman and there was a Mr. Kodak, because it was the Eastman Kodak Company.
Right.
But he really wanted it to be about his brand, Kodak, and the product, Kodak, and not about him.
And not about him.
And even some people don't know how generous, he gave away over $100 million in his lifetime, which in today's dollars would be more than $2 billion. And most of the things, he did not want his name. It wasn't until the laws changed as far as reporting income and capital gains and that sort of thing that people discovered that it was actually George Eastman behind the funds, because he wanted the organizations to flourish on their own without his name being part of it.
And again, I'm not into marketing, but you are, and that is genius, right? Because had he used his name, it probably would have died with him. But having something else, it just kept going.
Absolutely. Sometimes we begrudge the fact that he didn't use his name because you hear about, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, or even Thomas Edison, Ford, all these people who have their names.
Yeah.
But so it's a little bit of an uphill battle for us as far as who George Eastman was and his impact on the world.
Yeah, but it's cool that he's got people like you guys keeping his name alive, letting people know what exactly is going on, at the museum and at his home. And hopefully people, that are listening will do like me and make it on their calendar to get over there, because it's way overdue, right? For me, it's way overdue. So I want to encourage people to go out and visit not just the home, but also the films and all the exhibitions that you guys have.
Well, one of my favorite events that happens at the Dryden Theater, it happens 2 or 3 times a year, is that we have a naturalization ceremony at the Dryden Theater. So all of these new U.S. citizens are gathering with their families to become U.S. citizens. They're taking the pledge, and they're doing all the processing and paperwork, but this is the ceremony that, it sort of delineates that line. It's like before and after. Yeah. And we've got the next one is coming up this coming Tuesday. So we're gearing up for that. And there's 117, I think, people that are becoming naturalized as U.S. citizens. So that's always very inspirational. Your heart grows a little bit as you're watching these people.
I can imagine.
And it's very emotional, but celebratory in the same way. And it's really, really great.
Cool. Well, thank you all for being here with
you.
us today. I like to end the show by asking if there's a phrase or a saying that you grew up with, and I'm wondering if you guys have any.
I do. It's funny, when you first prompted, I was thinking, oh my gosh, what's it? And then it immediately came to me. So it's a very personal thing. My mom, who passed away about 4 years ago now, all growing up, she would use the phrase, "You're ready for the third grade." And it was because when I was in second grade, I was so scared about going into the third grade. And she said, "You're ready. You among all your peers, you all are ready." So it's a phrase I've used a lot of times. And
I
it's,
like that.
And it's come back to where I've shared it with others, people who, my loved ones. And then it's nice to reflect that anytime there's a question of, all right, what's coming next? Nope, you're ready for the third grade.
Nice. How about you?
My family was big into card playing, and we'd play a game called Hand and Foot. And as a small child, I really always wanted to play. So did my brothers, so did my cousins. And my grandmother would say to us, if you're going to play with the adults, you got to act like one.
Oh,
and in a way, I was always like, but I'm a kid.
Yeah, but I'm a kid.
Right? So in one way, I have to think about how she was trying to encourage us to kind of be mature and be able to participate with the adults. And in another way, I have to think about it as, it's okay to have fun and be a kid even now.
Yeah, cool. How about you?
Not surprisingly, mine comes from a film. So 6 years old, it was a big year in 1977 for films with Star Wars coming out. And then later in the year, Close Encounters, so Steven Spielberg's science fiction film. And it was a way to get into aliens without having them be scary or trying to attack us or anything. It's very benevolent. But repeated a couple of times throughout the film as the characters are trying to figure out what these symbols mean and what these communications mean. There's a character who looks at somebody else and says, "This is important. It means something." And I think that's resonated throughout my life as well. Just, as you are looking at something and you have that realization that you don't know exactly what it is yet, but you know that this is important. You know that this means something. Yeah. And as you investigate it further, maybe you can find out why that means it to you.
Yeah, cool. Love them all. Those were great. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I hope people come out and check you guys out, check out what's going on over there, check out the films, check out the exhibitions. Didn't know that SNAP and what was the other one?
SNAP EBT.
And BT.
And then active military also.
Free admission, so that's good to know. So families that are out there that are looking for something to do, now that the weather's getting better and spring break will be soon, it's a place for people to go with their families. So I hope people take advantage of that. Gracias a todos por acompañarnos en esta mañana. Lo esperamos nuevamente el próximo sábado de 10 a 11 de la mañana en Poder 97.1 FM, la única estación radial latina y dueña operado por latinos para la comunidad, por la comunidad. Esto ha sido su hora informativa, trayendo la información importante que nos inspira a una mejor calidad de vida. Que pasen una linda semana. Hasta la próxima, mi gente.